Hi, and welcome to the Good Health Podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Good, a registered nutritional therapy practitioner and functional medicine practitioner. Join me as we explore thyroid, brain, and fatigue conditions with positivity. From Hashimoto's to multiple sclerosis, chronic fatigue to adrenal dysfunction, I've got you covered. With expert advice and tips to help you take action now and inspiring real patient stories from successful individuals who refuse to let their health hold them back. Start your journey to good health today. And don't forget to come and join the conversation on Instagram at good_health. That's GOODE. Or visit my website at nicolegoodhealth.com to find out more. Today, I'm really excited to have welcomed Antony Haynes onto the Good Health Podcast. Antony has been in private practice for over 32 years and is one of the most experienced registered nutritional therapists in the UK. He's one of the first practitioners to implement the principles of functional medicine in the UK since 1992. Antony has seen over 19,000 clients and has learned much from the experiences. Each person is unique and has taught Antony that principles are what counts, not protocols. In addition to learning from his clients, Antony has also researched and then presented on multiple different subjects over the 32 years that he's been teaching. Over the past 14 years, Antony has focused much clinical and research time to addressing chronic hidden viral infections, which is what we're going to be discussing today, and in particular, their relevance to contributing to autoimmune conditions. He's met hundreds of clients with viral infections that have been identified with lab tests. He has witnessed improvements in the vast majority of clients after recommending a variety of remedies and natural substances to help his clients' immune systems to function more capably versus the viruses. Antony is also a successful award-winning author of 2 books on nutrition, The Insulin Factor and The Food Intolerance Bible. And he has appeared on television and radio. In March 2011, Antony was awarded the prestigious Can Magazine Award for Outstanding Practice for his many years of educating, inspiring, motivating, and helping practitioners and patients. Let's jump straight into this conversation on autoimmune conditions, the immune system, and chronic viral infections. Okay, Antony, welcome very much to the Good Health Podcast. It's great to have you here today.
Thanks, Nicole. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so I always do a little bit of prep when I'm doing these guest episodes and, sort of research the guest a little bit more detail, think about topics that we can discuss and things like that. And I usually pretty quickly if I don't already know it already, I pretty quickly get to one thing that I want to discuss with somebody. But here's the thing with you, and it's a good thing, so don't worry. There is so much that we could talk about. There's so many different topics that you are so knowledgeable on. I've seen you at many conferences, heard you speak before. I've followed you for a long time. And I can honestly say that there are so many areas that we could dive into from your experience. And I'm really, really looking forward to this conversation. But the thing that I've picked up as the thing we want to sort of dive into today is the infections and autoimmune disease. Because I heard you speak on this recently and was just fascinated by your knowledge in it and the concepts that you came up with. So as we've seen from the introduction that I've done, you've done so much in your career, but I'd like to just sort of start with, for the listeners really, is how did you originally get into this field, into the work of nutrition, functional medicine? Because you were doing functional medicine, particularly in the UK, way before it was a thing. It still feels like it's becoming a thing now. It doesn't feel like it's quite there, but you got into this so long ago. So what was that journey? How did you get into the field and find this area?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Really, I was taken back I was having lunch with a friend who I used to play sport with and at school. And he said, in 1980, when we were 15, you said, what food is going to best nourish us for peak performance? In 1980. Now, At the time, I think the conclusion we reached was very naive. I think that was the time microwaves were just becoming available. And we were so busy, we didn't have time to bake anything. So I think it was a potato microwaved that would give us the carbohydrate energy. We thought carbohydrates energy. So it's very naive, 15-year-old pursuit. It was something we did inquire about. So, and he reminded me of that the other day. He said, well, actually, so I can pinpoint a moment in time where I had a conversation with somebody about nutrition way before the word nutrition was ever known or nutritionists didn't exist. So that's when I first got into health and nutrition. I made lots and lots of mistakes. And I think having baked potatoes too often is not a good idea. If you've seen the glycemic index of a cooked baked potato, it's about 100. So it's not necessarily, but it could be very good for boys running around playing multi-sports all day. And then I became ever more interested. I read whatever magazines were available, I read them. And then I was training with the army. And then I got so much into health and realized that in training in the army, I thought it would be good. It's not healthy at all. And so I actually chose to leave the short service commission that I was engaged with and left there in 1988 to be a nutritionist. And it took me a couple of years to find the Institute for Optimum Nutrition, where I did study from 1990, graduated in 92. I began teaching in 91. So I was teaching while I was a student. And then I did the third year with Kate Neal and who's set up CNELM, so hats off to her, and others as well. And so I became friends with Patrick Holford as well. It came from a sports performance position rather than, I'm unwell, I've got to find a route forward, which I mean, many of my clients have been nutritionists. And it's like, well, the reason I'm here is because the reason I'm functioning is because I was so unwell. I found nutrition, and I so loved it that I thought I'd study. And that's quite a common theme. For me, it was more sports related. And so it didn't really relate to a wide array of conditions that, of course, I've become more familiar with. And really, it's been a journey. I mean, someone asked me, I'm 58 now, and am I going to retire? That's never crossed my mind. And I'm always learning. There's so much to learn, and also lots that I've unlearned as well. So although I've actually studied for maybe 75,000 hours of nutrition, there's so much that I've actually thought that I knew was true. And again, I think it's Mark Twain's fantastic quote: "It's the things you think you know for sure that just ain't so." I mean, I love that one because it keeps you humble. It keeps you realizing, well, actually, if I think I know this for sure, maybe I'll dig into it and see there's a different aspect to it. And as the years have gone by, actually, we started effectively putting into practice the principles of functional medicine, which I liken in a way to naturopathy with biochemistry, because it is that sort of holistic perspective, about 1994. And first met Jeff Bland that year, I think, 1994, when he was one of the co-founders of the Institute of Functional Medicine at Bastille College. He spoke with polysyllabic speed, faster than I speak, in words that I'd never heard before. And it was sort of reassuringly technical, but boy, did I understand it? I'm not sure I did, to be honest. So that's where that sort of introduction to the Institute of Functional Medicine came from. And then we took ourselves off from 1997, and I've been about 21 annual conferences and engaged the courses. And as you may know, co-founded Nutrilink with Michael Ash. And then we've become the hosts for the Institute of Functional Medicine training in Europe. It really has been it feels like it's still new. I mean, you mentioned, functional medicine being new. It feels like I'm just getting started. It might sound crazy, and maybe if any practitioners with any years under your belt, you might feel the same. Well, I'm just getting started. Or gosh, well, Anthony's been practicing for 33 years now. I'm way behind. I never sort of get there. Well, actually, I still feel that actually remarkably the same. I'm still getting started. There's so much to it. There's so much to learn.
Yeah. But isn't that what makes it interesting? Is I think as a job is that you can never know everything. There's always some new research coming out. There's this thing, like you said, things change, things we used to think were right. That's what I think makes it so fascinating and so interesting.
And then I agree with you. And so the notion that it is so fantastically relevant. And I still get the same joy when a client has improvements as I did back in 1992 or 91 when I was seeing as a student. I was helping one of the men in my village, the father in my village. I think he gave me a check for £75 the year I graduated, which is so kind of me because I helped him for no charge as a student and helped his gout improve. However, I think probably a low purine diet and taking cherry extract, I think was still the thing then. It is a remarkable journey. I actually if I can share this with you as a tip, it has crossed my mind more recently. And there are certain things that over the years is I start with every client with a place of I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
And I find that such a useful thing. It may be very obvious to say, but maybe some of us have that thought. Well, anyway, I just don't know what's going on. But I deliberately, if I have a thought about, I know what's going on here, I said, no, let's just wait. Gather the data, put it together in a pattern recognition method, and then I just don't know what's going on. I'd much rather start from I don't know to then gather and get some more knowledge as opposed to thinking I know something that leads me down the wrong path. And I think that's the problem with protocols as well. Protocols give you a sense that, here's the shoe, let's fit it on your foot type thing. And then so I'm sort of anti-protocols. But protocols are useful, having said that, to look at lists of things to choose from for the individual, as opposed to saying, let's fit that shoe. I think a shoe on your foot would be good, but maybe it's not this particular shoe.
Yeah, and it might be that you have I mean, I'm sure we'll get to sort of some of the things that you can do for some of the things that we talk about. And there are those things, but I think it's taking a protocol, for sort of want of a better word, and then personalizing it to each person, isn't it? It's making sure if you have that thing that is, well, I often do this, but actually checking, is this a thing you need to do with that individual? And I think that's what makes functional medicine so So great.
Absolutely. And there's so many in-depth. I mean, also, there's a challenge with testing too. Testing is expensive, as are supplements. So many things in life now are more expensive. But the tests, if you have a test for something and you have an imbalance, then if you're the client and I'm the practitioner, we say, well, we both want to correct that imbalance because we've got it on a piece of paper. But actually, maybe the test wasn't the best test to do. And maybe that's literally, it's over here. I liken it perhaps to an archery board, and there's a bullseye and then there's other rings around it. Well, it's all very well hitting the target, but I'd like to hit the bullseye, which is what I've said before. And so if you have a test and it's actually a test in an outer ring and you think it's the most appropriate test, but actually it's not, you could then be really not scoring many points if you follow the analogy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Today, I've said, we're going to dig into that sort of autoimmune disease. I work with people with autoimmune disease, so a lot of my listeners have one or another of them, or more than one, as the case may be.
Yeah, exactly.
The first thing with autoimmune disease that I think is an issue, and it's a question that I have on my intake form, is for people to write down their diagnoses. And then later on the form, I actually have a box that they can tick that says, do you have an autoimmune disease? The reason I ask that is because I can't tell you how many times someone will write a diagnosis in the first part that is an autoimmune disease, and then they won't tick the box for autoimmunity. And it's not an error. They genuinely don't realize that the illness that they have got is autoimmune. And it's a problem. And it's the reason that I have the box, because I want to understand, does this person realize that there's these autoimmune processes going on? Why do you think that is? Why do you think that this picture of autoimmunity kind of gets missed and people don't realize that that's what they've got?
Well, I think first of all, it is a good question. Having had probably thousands of clients with autoimmunity, and it is ever growing. And I didn't have so much confidence in autoimmunity because it felt like it was a separate phenomenon, which is maybe what clients, patients think themselves. But if you've got rheumatoid arthritis, so that's it. They don't, but I believe the consultant and doctors are simply not saying, did you know, or by the way, this is, so they're not being told by the man in the white coat, the diagnosis that this, by the way, the rheumatoid arthritis is an autoimmune condition. It's basically, it's RA, it's rheumatoid arthritis, it's arthritis. So it's arthritis, and it's basically, that's what's fallen on my head from the sky. Can't possibly think how that happened. And also there are ever increasing number. How many people with heart disease are told that it's an autoimmune condition? And that's more extreme example, because rheumatoid arthritis and multiple sclerosis and psoriasis, well, they're autoimmune conditions. And so Hashimoto is the most common one. And maybe people will realize that. I think they're just given the label, but they're not then given the next byline, which is, by the way, this is an autoimmune condition. And also then they, of course, have no idea that, in fact, there are some standard phenomenon that might be linking to its food sensitivity, leaky gut, stress, toxins, and infections, which we'll talk about.
Yeah.
So I think it's the fact that actually I think it's a reflection from the top down. I don't believe the people who are making the diagnosis are actually emphasizing enough, because for them, whether you've got a non-communicable disease or a degenerative disease, they don't make a distinction for their patients. It's just it's conditions A to Z diagnosis. That's what I've got. They don't separate them out into the nature of what they are.
Yeah. And it is a problem, and there are reasons why people need to know that it is autoimmune. That is important. We know from autoimmune diseases that they're rapidly growing, and it's a big problem. There's no doubt about this now. There's more and more illnesses that are being categorized as autoimmune to start with.
Yes.
That's sort of the first thing.
Such as heart disease. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which is not one that we would have ever sort of most people wouldn't have thought was categorized as sort of autoimmune. So there's more and more being categorized. The incidence is growing as well. I was reading a paper recently from the University of Oxford who was saying it's around 1 in 10. And I think that's a figure that's probably been floated pretty regularly in sort of different papers and things like that. Yeah. Conditions like Hashimoto's, I've read, sort of between 9 and 12% a year. It's growing. So, I mean, they're really high. Yeah. This is not just a sort of small increase. This is a big problem. And
yes.
And a lot of those figures also, the other thing I think is that those are just the people who are getting a diagnosis and are at that stage. But we've got a whole wealth of people who are in that sort of stage prior to diagnosis, where they've got symptoms, they have got sort of those autoimmune processes going on, but they're not necessarily ticking those boxes to get a diagnosis.
Are you familiar with the US Army's review study on the blood samples they had frozen from the past?
No.
Okay, so I wish I could quote it, but it's something I've actually heard in a lecture as opposed to seeing written down and be able to quote. So the Army conducted a survey. They had individuals with autoimmune conditions. They looked then because they're taking blood from the troops. Okay, giving blood, right? Yes, sir. Give blood, store it, freeze it. They went back in time to see, this is actually shared by Tom O'Brien. You might know Tom
Yeah, I
O'Brien.
know Tom O'Brien, yeah.
Who's a friend of mine as well. And they went back to see, well, when were the antibodies present? Well, it's a pretty good idea, right?
Wow.
And they went back. And so you're actually right. So the symptoms and the antibodies were present before the symptoms began. That was rather obvious. And they went back, and it was at least 6 years before the symptoms occurred. Antibodies started to form. Now, if you measure antibodies in the blood, there's lots and lots of different antibodies, but that was fascinating because you either do it from doctors, the physicians sort of study, or the Framingham study, or the nurses study. The big studies, you've got thousands and thousands of people who are accessible for blood draws, and the army is another one. So they 6 years before they found raised antibodies. So the condition began 6 years before the symptoms began, and they might have had symptoms for years before the diagnosis was actually made. So really, really interesting.
Yeah, I've heard Dr. Karazian talk about this as well a lot. I think he said sort of, it could be up to 10 years. And,
yes.
But it's amazing how you can have those antibodies and then you move into this sort of silent autoimmunity, then you become symptomatic before you kind of get to the autoimmune disease. And obviously in the silent, a lot of people don't know there's anything wrong with them, so they wouldn't be getting testing done at that point.
And why would you? And that's why that sort of testing that they've done is the only way you can really find that information out.
It's so interesting. Yeah.
And that was as far as I know, that was the average. It doesn't mean to say that some people could have been 12 years, some people could have been 2 years. So,
Yeah. We've got this bank of people who are not yet diagnosed. And the figures that we're talking about are the diagnosed people, the people who have reached that. And I think with diagnoses as well, it is a bit of a case of you have to fit into a box to get the diagnosis within the sort of system that we have. And it can take a while. I mean, it took me 15 years to get a diagnosis. So I'm sort of well aware of this, this picture.
Yeah.
What do you think the reasons are behind this rapid increase in the autoimmunity?
Yeah. I think the burden of toxins in the world, for variously massive differences in opinions from toxicology assessments from 80,000 to 200,000 toxins. Obviously, that's a massive difference, but basically tens of thousands of toxins. And variously on the list, there are 6,000 categorical poisons of those. And what's interesting is that a lot of those are invisible and odorless. So if you ask somebody, so what would you reckon where I got this pesticide from or something? So, or this particular plastic endocrine disrupting chemical, what do you think I got from it? So I don't know. I can't be true. I don't know. That test is wrong because I couldn't possibly. And then because they're odorless and invisible, so you never know if you're exposed. And also you weren't keeping in touch with all the other people in that vicinity where they sprayed that stuff. You weren't keeping in touch with everybody to see how their health was, to know that they might be having challenges too, or maybe your genetic disposition for detoxification might be impaired, so you had a worse problem than perhaps your direct neighbor if you're living in the same place for a certain period of time. I think toxins and modern living with stress, I think the stress of life for Hans Selye, describing the stress of life, I think the notion that modern living is very different. Now, I had the pleasure of talking to my grandfather, who happened to be 106 when he died. So he was an old person, born in 1905. So talking to him, and I wish, of course, you always wish this when people have passed away in your family, we should have these conversations, but conversation about what he did and his life. So basically, always finish work at 5:30. The bell rang and you were told to leave the office. That's it. You can't stay on. There's no opportunity for overtime. That's it. You go, and then it was a very much more balanced life. And the things they didn't no screens, didn't stay inside. He went on the train to Newton Abbot, which actually happens to be where Nutralink is, and then he got the train to Buckfastleigh, and then they walked here, and they spent the whole day. It was almost like the railway children kind of image of basically just being outdoors, etc. Now, the Industrial Revolution did mean that London was smogged at that time. He did tell me that he went to train in London where he didn't see daylight for the whole day. It really was smog. On the train from Reading to London, smog. So they had particulate matter, which would certainly be a negative for respiratory conditions in particular. The overall nature of it, that stress, and also they didn't wear wristwatches. And so I think time. And so I've chosen since actually the first lockdown to not to wear a watch because I'm here. I can see the clock. I can see it. So I don't have to. And I think not wearing a watch has less stress for me. So I think time pressure, expectations, and filling the day with things. It's not allowing our children to get bored for 1 minute, to have creative thought. So I think overall sympathetic on, if I call it that, sympathetic stress on today compared to 50, compared to 100 years ago, huge difference, plus the toxins. Now, you may be familiar with this expression, stress stops detox. And then it's detox or die is the next one. But so if we've got more sympathetic on, we've got more inhibition of our detoxification pathways, meaning that whatever toxins are present are all the more likely to have a negative impact. And part of the sympathetic on, with looking at time rush is a significant stress for people. And maybe it's less at home. And I know some people did very well lockdown because they weren't in that time rush. They were kind of like, they didn't have that. And that was a benefit for lots of people. I think with the sympathetic on, that also suppresses immunity. So sympathetic on suppresses immunity. It suppresses detoxification, I think, suppress immunity and decreased capacity to detoxify the increased burden of toxins, quite apart from the fact that there's an increased burden of toxins. And with the increased burden of toxins, you may or may not have heard this or be aware of this, and you may be very aware of it, is that there is a strong association with toxins and viruses. So toxins appear to disable the capacity of the immune system to handle viruses, which are short, chains of peptides. And so I think the two go together. When I find someone with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, I think every human being's got a degree of that, to be honest. I don't know, we haven't talked about that, but I actually think that everyone's got a degree of PTSD. It's just a question of where on the spectrum they are and how small and big are the letters, really. But stress stops detox. So everyone with PTSD, therefore, is a candidate for having an excess burden of toxins, but also viruses. It was actually my meeting with Professor Alan Ebring. I don't know if you've heard me share this before, but he's a professor of molecular science at King's College. So it's actually from the Harley Street practice I was in. He was probably about a mile as the crow flies from where I was working. I met him in Seattle, a long way away. And he's a very gracious man. And he was describing the nature of how infections contribute to autoimmunity. And it was completely new to me in 2010. I just had no inkling of it. So I was so grateful I was at that particular Institute of Functional Medicine annual conference. I had a chat with him there briefly. Very gracious man. And he shared that he'd been sharing the molecular information about the nature of how infections can contribute to autoimmunity for 30 years. Yeah, which I know I just hadn't looked. And search terms are key, and I'm sure you've done the same thing. If you do the wrong search, you won't find the information. If you don't look, it's a bit like your description of spitting into the box to get the diagnosis. Unless you actually look for that particular thing, you won't find it. He described that he's been teaching rheumatologists, in particular rheumatologists, because his work was to do rheumatology and also autoimmune neurological conditions at King's College with the team Rashid and Wilson. And so I've actually followed their work as well. And he's retired now. Not one single consultant that he presented to. So here's a PhD, professor of immunology, talking to people about molecular sequences and how infections contribute to autoimmunity. Not one single consultant over those years changed anything they were doing to treat their patients on the basis of the information he shared. Now, he wasn't, I'd have been a bit more about that. I'd have given it a bit of bitterness, perhaps, and a bit of a critical thing, and maybe being a bit sarcastic in the presentation. He's so gracious. He just literally just simply described it and didn't seem to have be upset by that, thankfully for him. And it was basically, and he said, and we asked him why. I said, why don't you think individuals are taking on this information from your team where it's clearly shown that antibodies to certain bacteria are strongly associated with conditions? And he said, well, when you're threatening their salary, no one's going to change anything. And the perception is that if the consultants were to address the underlying issues of these infectious agents, whether that was possible or not, they wouldn't have any more patients.
Yeah.
So they didn't do anything. So they followed the standard medical practice of immune suppressant drugs and biologics and all those things. So it's
unbelievable,
like,
isn't it?
Okay. So and he had the grace. I sent him an email when I got back, and I got a phone call. Because my phone call was on my email, he phoned me up. He actually phoned me up. So I thought, I felt blessed. That was one of those moments in life thinking, I've met Jeff Bland very much and he knows my name. So it's sort of first name terms. So that's sort of one thing. And then teaching with Ari Vajtani is another, that's sort of definite marker in my life of humility and appreciation. And he phoned me up and we had a chat. I said to him, well, what about the consideration of giving antibiotics to inhibit this bacteria that contributes to rheumatoid arthritis? He said, exactly that. He said, yes, that's absolutely what you do, which is why the fear of the consultants was rheumatology. If we give antibiotics to clients to inhibit Proteus mirabilis, maybe they'll be cured of rheumatoid arthritis and we won't have any clients. We won't have any patients and therefore we won't have a career. And I won't be able to continue to send our children to private school, sort of thing. I mean, no. Now, at the same time, if someone were to threaten my salary and my income, of course, it would concern me. But of course, it's very short-sighted because, of course, you could set yourself up as addressing and then put the word out, especially with the internet now. Just absolutely fascinating. So he gave his presentation, and I was in Seattle. I came back, my very, very first client, and this is the law of the universe, which I'm sure you can connect to, was an RA patient, handsome man that affects women more than men. And he was the uncle of a lady that I'd seen and helped with another condition. So it wasn't so random, but it was the very first client I had back. Now, I had the eBringer papers, and this is in 2010. So I had a photocopier, and I photocopied the papers, and I said, look, there was no test for Proteus mirabilis, this bacteria that's present in everyone's gut to some degree. It's the amount that matters. And this chap was an engineer. He didn't want to take medications, and that's why he came to see me. He didn't want to take the medical route. And she said, well, I gave him the papers. I explained to him, and I said, we don't know if you've got this, but it's maybe worth a shot. And he said, I'll do it. So I recommended the ADP oregano extract from Biotics Research, which is a sustained release emulsified form of oregano, unlike any other form you'll find, that reaches the parts that other beers can't reach. Effectively, it's also a biofilm inhibitor, which I didn't really appreciate so much then. And he basically is free of RA.
Amazing, isn't it? It's unbelievable.
In 6 months.
And that is a great supplement as well. It's one I use, and it's definitely the best of those ones. But it's just amazing how there can be this research out there that is essentially ignored.
It is. It's molecular medical research, but it's nothing to do with how you would treat anybody. It's not any nice recommendations, et cetera, et cetera. So in fact, for me, in terms of it might have gone, there may be other occasions that I missed in life where I've heard an amazing presentation, but then it's not manifest in my clinical practice. So I've sort of like intellectually parked it and not engaged in with clinical practice. So that was a real fortune for me, because then it's like, gosh, that really did work. And he went to see the consultant, and I've shared this story before, because he was very interested. And the consultant's a brilliant consultant who diagnosed him, is a professor of rheumatology. And he's the professor who remembers people's hands and feet rather than their faces, so the name. So he can just do it. And he grabbed his hand, grabbed his elbows and knees and feet, and he said, you don't have rheumatoid arthritis. And he said, so my client said, that's interesting, because the person who diagnosed me said I'd have rheumatoid arthritis for the rest of my life. And he said, well, that was a blooming idiot. He must have said that, said the consultant. And then he said, it was you, sir. and the consultant ushered physically my client out of the room.
Yeah.
And then my client got a letter from him 2 weeks later saying that rheumatoid arthritis can achieve spontaneous remission.
Unbelievable, isn't it?
That's kind of an extreme story, but I've heard many stories kind of like it. So then, of course, I was all the more interested in Alan Ebring's work and then the association between bugs. And so that's when I met Armin Labs, and I looked at whatever labs were available to assess. And Armin Labs were one that was available at the time for assessing antibodies to viruses in Germany. Then I discovered HHV6 very quickly on. And then I spoke to Ari Vojtanian. I met him at the next year's conference, and I said, hello, Ari, get introductions and pleasantries. HHV6, he said, look at my website, Immunoscience Labs, HHV6 is likely to be a major contributor to autoimmune conditions. So I've been finding that with so many people with autoimmune conditions. Anyway, so it's been a journey since then, of course, so then primed for COVID about what to do for viruses. But viruses contribute, but also bacteria do too. And then I had the pleasure also of meeting Garth Nicholson, PhD, a Nobel Prize nominee, and one of the co-authors of the Singh and Nicholson fluid mosaic of cell membrane activity, which is 50 years old, and it's stunning. And so meeting Garth Nicholson at a conference, I think it may be in the very same one actually, I actually had the opportunity of having breakfast with him, because I'm like that. I said, do you mind if I have breakfast with you? And so we had breakfast with him, and I mean, he is a legend, and he's also found similar things. He's found the presence of bugs present in those with MS in particular he was looking at. So if we identify those bugs and we inhibit them, then the body can stop making antibodies to parts of the body that it was making antibodies to. You can help to mitigate and possibly even alter the case. And then I had a lady who's now become a kinesiologist practitioner, who knows if she's listening today, who confirmed had 6 lesions in her brain on a scan, an MS, and was diagnosed. And so that was that. And that's the way it's going to go, take these drugs. And then the repeat scan test a year or two later, 0 lesions in her brain. And we identified chlamydia pneumoniae. Bacteria. So it's chlamydia is often associated with the sexually transmitted disease, but that's trachomatis, as you know, the pneumonia. So CP. So I refer to it to my clients as CP. So I don't have to use the word chlamydia in conversation. So it's CP, not CT, which is the trachomatis. And we inhibited the chlamydia pneumoniae, and she's no longer has MS. And she's so impressed that she didn't buy the company like Gillette, but she became a practitioner. as a result of that. And so it's just fantastic. So we've got a virus there. We've got a small bacteria, Chlamydia pneumoniae. And the reason why these things can contribute to autoimmunity, there are three fundamental reasons, as far as I know, that a virus or infection can contribute to an autoimmune condition. One is a more straightforward way of understanding it, but it's molecular mimicry. Yep. So this looks like this. And this is the work that Alan Ebringer and Wilson and Rashid were doing. They're looking at the series of amino acids in sequence, which I know Dr. Scaragian has looked at as well. Yeah. And basically it's like, it's in the way it's very simple for us to understand. It's like letters in the alphabet. And if you've got so many letters, so many words the same in that particular protein in your body, as is in the antigen, i.e. the protein of the bug to which the body's making antibodies, your body goes, okay, I'm gonna get rid of you. You're a threat to me. So I'm going to, okay. And it's amazing. I've got 6 amino acid sequences to look out for. So in my lipocytes, this is the way I liken it, I see 6 sequence there. And the trouble is though, in the heat of battle, inflammation raging, is that
those mistakes are made.
There's over there. So in fact, that's pretty close. I think I'll shoot some bullets in anyway. So it's sort of like, so it doesn't have to be exact, but you've got a similar sequence of 6 amino acids in sequence. Is what all it takes for the unbelievably sensitive immune system. I mean, these snipers are very good. So you make antibodies to the tissue. So protease mirabilis, 6 amino acid sequence in there, or even more, or less, depending on an individual possibly, is the same as certain types of collagen in the body. Now, collagen's a long protein, so is gluten, so is casein, so collagen's a very long protein. And within it, you've got lots of different sequences of amino acids. So protease mirabilis antigen has this 6 amino acid sequence here, and in the collagen, it's there, so the body attacks collagen. Now, so the logic would be, so if we get rid of the protease, which is what we do with this client, well, we inhibited it. Who knows, ultimately, we never did a test for it. And Alan Ebringer said, well, there was definitely a test for protease, but because there was absolutely no demand, the test it saw its demise. So you can only get probably Cyrex Labs is probably the only place that can test for protease really now, or possibly others too. But if it's in the stool, that's one thing, but you really want to look at antibodies to it rather than the presence of it, essentially. And then with Chlamydia pneumoniae, the myelin sheath contains, although it's a fatty lipid substance, it has this amino acid sequence that's very close to identical to a 6 amino acid sequence in Chlamydia pneumoniae. So it attacks the myelin sheath.
Yeah. And the other one, so I know you mentioned that molecular mimicry. The other one is bystander activation as well.
That's the second of the third one. And the other one is viral persistence. So actually you've got a viral persistence, which is basically aggravating it, which in a way for me is more like bystander activation. So HHV6 and EBV, I believe, not only they play a role in both molecular mimicry, potentially certainly driving Hashimoto's in particular, but also EBV drives lupus as well. But you've got bystander activation. So it sort of does the immune system in and alters the sort of Th1, Th2 balance, really making more antibodies to things and increasing allergies. So we know allergies have increased, food sensitivities have increased, and autoimmune conditions have increased. And there is also a theory that antibiotic use has actually got a role to play in that. So to come into the causes, environmental toxins, but also the internal milieu has changed with the inability of our friendly bacteria to do the job that it should be doing, which is counteracting inflammation, amongst other things.
Yeah. You touched there on the HHV6 and EBV, which is herpes as well, HHV4, isn't it? So
yes, yeah, it's a herpes family.
I see those a lot in clinic. It's also my personal journey. So you may not know this. So I have MS, and my trigger was EBV. So that's sort of my backstory to it. How big a problem do you? Because I'm seeing these a lot. I've actually seen, particularly since COVID, I've seen a lot of reactivation. Because this is, I think, the other thing with these viruses, isn't it? Is that you can have the active infection in the body, but you can also have reactivation of them. And I've seen quite a lot of reactivation. How big a problem do you think these viruses are? Because people, if they're not testing, they don't sort of know that it's happening.
Okay. Well, first of all, I really wish you well with obviously what you're faced with. And there was a study coming out, I think it was 2 years ago, I heard the study. Again, it was a US Army study. You may be aware of it. So they looked at identified which of the troops effectively had MS, and they tracked back, and they found that Epstein-Barr virus was a significant factor, but didn't test for Chlamydia pneumoniae or Mycoplasma pneumoniae, which is what Garth Nicholson had done. So for me, when you've got one, you tend to have another one. It's a bit like autoimmune conditions. If you've got one condition label, there's probably got one that's quiescent, or you've got generating somewhere else as well. It's quite rare. If you look for them, you can almost find anyone's got one autoimmune condition, they've got another one brewing or another one, which makes sense because the immune system is failing. It's more trigger happy at making these things. So, and you may or may not also have heard Armin Schwartzbach, maybe you have, describe the 500,000 blood tests they received over a 2-year period after COVID started. And every single blood sample from across the world, whether people were jabbed or unjabbed or had COVID, they didn't know the history of these people. Every single one had a reactivated virus. And EBV was the most common. HHV6 and varicella zoster, I believe, were the top 3. You may have listened to that particular podcast.
Yeah.
So reactivation of viruses, hugely relevant. And now I believe that's part of the drive of autoimmune conditions, which may be a slow process rather than the acute issues we've heard about people having, more significant negatives from COVID or having had the jabs. This is it's basically initiated an autoimmune profile in someone. So I think the reactivity of viruses, hugely relevant. And then I would question, let's say for you, I wonder, well, and maybe you've tested this, and this perhaps is not just an interview for you, but it's, do you actually have the presence of CP or MP, mycoplasma pneumonia and CP? And you've got, what else is going on? Because I found that the clients, before EBV came into the light more 2 years ago, I found that I was helping clients reduce their MS scenario without addressing EBV. So it's a question, is it more of but the ARMY study was for years back.
Yeah.
So I believe it's probably a collection of things as well. And also they weren't looking at toxic burden, which is extremely challenging to test for.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? A lot of people sort of say to me, or a lot of clients will sort of ask me, so what, they're aware of this root cause thing. I think people are becoming more aware of that. But they ask the question, so what's my root cause? And I'm always like, it's very unlikely that there's going to be one. We're probably going to find, a few different things that are going on as, these sort of root causes and things that are driving this. And it's about finding each one, building on that, and improving. And for me, I mean, I didn't go down the medical route. I've never taken the medication. I didn't go down, I had the scans and things like that, but I didn't go down the medical route in terms of treatment. I'd been 15 years. It had been a long road. I'd had numerous misdiagnoses, so I was already losing faith, I think, a little bit anyway. But I got found functional medicine, and that I'm a bit like you said at the beginning. It's a lot of us get into this story from a health perspective, and for me, that's what it was. I found functional medicine. It helped me. I have very mild sort of MS now. I occasionally flare up if I get a virus or something like that. Usually is when I'll have something. Other than that, I'm back living my life. And
fantastic. So pleased to hear that.
Yeah, and that's
well done you, and that's all on you, as opposed to thank God I had the right doctor.
It's taking control of that journey, I think, isn't it, and deciding But it's also finding these things and finding functional medicine, which was a huge part of my journey. And that was what led me to go back and retrain. So the other side from you coming at it from that performance side, there is this whole picture of it isn't just one thing. It is a bit of a slow journey, and it's finding one thing and the next thing and building on that and seeing improvements. And
yeah, absolutely. I've actually got a slide, if I may. I'm just going to find it now if I can. If I can find it, I had it up earlier, which actually just highlights. It's a very simplistic model. I mean, it is simplistic, but I think it's a useful thing. And I'm just going to see if I can share it now. If I can find it. Too many things up on my screen. So autoimmune conditions, so there must be a genetic component to it. So a lot of people feel it's just genetic. Okay, so it's falling my head from the sky. It's one of those things, and it's bad luck. Oh, woe is me. Oh, thank goodness I've got these painkillers. Then you've got dietary components, so food reactivity, food sensitivity. We know that gluten is one of the main drivers, and casein can be cross-reactivity. And then you've got avenins in oats, which I found to be very common now. Oats in the last 5 years, I would say I'm technically celiac, which I didn't appreciate. And then I did a test with Tom O'Brien with Cyrex about 6-7 years ago. And it was actually, this is a celiac profile, not a gluten sensitivity profile. So dietary components and the leaky gut scenario, toxic chemicals we talked about, and of course there's so many different. They're so difficult to pronounce. I can't to write them down would be almost impossible. And phthalates is difficult enough, and you've got the gut microbiome, and so hence my conversation about the antibiotics. Since antibiotics have been introduced, and I've seen a very interesting parallel with the increase in antibiotics and the increase of autoimmunity at the same pace, inhibiting the gut microbiome. And of course, the term microbiome is now probably a lay term. It's probably moved, and it's probably I don't read the magazines, but it's probably in the magazines that people read. And then you got the infectious agents. And so I'm just showing you that I found that the toxin metals and toxins and infections go very well together. But the other one that is not on here is stress. I think the modern living stress, I was describing my grandfather's nature, way of life. It was like the leisure hours he had in his life were 4 hours more a day than mine.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got no doubt about that. And just out in the wild where hopefully it wasn't in the fields where they've been spraying things. Just everyone had organic food as a matter of course type of thing, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the infections, it introduces this whole other bystander activation and molecular mimicry scenario. I mean, it really does. So it introduces a whole new area. And I think with the fear of COVID, which is a pervasive fear, and I actually had, I'm very much into energetic things, and I operate with kinesiology, and I'm actually a sound therapist as well. There's all kinds of things you find that are effective, not just nutrition, of course, with the journey. Yeah. As some wise man said, I wasn't King Solomon because he's long gone, but it was some wise man said recently, the future of medicine is not pills, potions, vitamins, pills, etc. It's vibration. Everything is frequency. And so that's interesting in itself. EBV, I would estimate, is probably one of the most profound negative bugs that contributes to autoimmune necrosis through bystander activation and molecular mimicry. Yeah. There's both strong connection with Hashimoto's and, as we know, with MS in particular. But who knows what else is, because maybe it hasn't been studied for the other autoimmune conditions. But I think there's a general negative, Epstein-Barr virus, HHV6, which is, again, as human herpes virus 6. Some of them have got names after people who discovered them. I think it was Anthony Epstein or Antony Barr, but they've left out one of the discoverers of Epstein-Barr, they've left out the name. So some have got names and some have got descriptions of the size of them, like cytomegalovirus, which is another herpes virus. Yeah. So an HSV1, HSV2. So Epstein-Barr virus, HHV6, strong drivers for autoimmunity. Then you've got the chlamydia pneumoniae, the small bacteria, which is an intracellular bacteria, which is quite hard to get at, and it was originally found in the lung, hence the Latin term, in a genitive case, pneumoniae, which means belonging to the lung or of the lung. And then you've got mycoplasma pneumoniae, which is sort of bacteria, sort of cell membrane-free bacteria, also found in high prevalence in MS. Cytomegalovirus, another herpes virus. And then you've got Helicobacter pylori, which I'm actually presenting a webinar on. First time I've ever given a dedicated webinar to H. pylori. I've talked about it, and I've had some extraordinary cases. It's a really curious thing because there are 17 different strains of H. pylori plus. So H. pylori is also a driver, potentially certainly of Hashimoto's, but maybe others as well. That's a bacteria. And then you've got Proteus mirabilis, I've mentioned, to do with arthritis. There's also Prevotella bacterius with arthritis. And then Klebsiella pneumoniae, specifically linked to ankylosing spondylitis, which is, again, the word from Ebringer. So Ebringer was the first person to talk about a low-carbohydrate, low-starch diet. Basically, low-starch diet. Don't feed the Klebsiella with starch because it makes ankylosing spondylitis worse. So I had a conversation with Alan Ebringer about this, but KP, so you need HLA-B27 positive, and Klebsiella pneumoniae, and 100% of people with ankylosing spondylitis have those two present, but not everyone who has those two present has ankylosing spondylitis. It's a relatively small percentage. So you need those two things to be present. So KP. So KP.
And that's the case with a lot of these, isn't it? I think just because you have the virus doesn't necessarily mean, it's not like, everybody with, Epstein-Barr or whatever, not everybody with that virus will end up with, MS or...
It's a small percentage. It's a small percentage. Yeah. And that's why, as you said, looking at the whole, and that's why I've indicated that as you do a test or you get positive, it's not necessarily the thing to focus on. So maybe some clients who with MS, let's say, have EBV positive, so you engage in an antiviral program, but actually maybe they got CP, chlamydia pneumoniae, which is an intracellular bacteria. It's a small one compared to a lot of bacteria, which can be 50 to 100 times larger than a virus. So Klebsiella pneumoniae, famous for its association really with ankylosing spondylitis. And again, I would say hand on heart, with my memory being probably less than ideally perfect, but I would say every single client with ankylosing spondylitis has gotten better by addressing, not feeding, and then killing the Klebsiella pneumoniae, quite apart from offering palliative support for reducing inflammation. So what's the next one? Porphyromonas gingivalis. So oral health. And I know there are more and more sort of webinars and podcasts about oral health and overall immunity. Porphyromonas gingivalis can also be an agent that promotes autoimmunity. Hep C, hepatitis C virus associated with Hashimoto's and a variety of other, maybe lupus as well. And then we have this HTLV1 infection, which is less well known because it's complicated in a sense. Human T lymphotropic virus type 1. That's also associated with a variety of autoimmune conditions, including Hashimoto's. And then we got Endolinaxana. That's an amoeba. And that's been shown to cause reactive arthritis as an autoimmune condition. And then we've got down the bottom, Staphylococcus aureus. That's been associated with skin conditions, including, actually, no, it's associated with sarcoidosis, that one in particular. But again, maybe it hasn't been studied in others to discover that that's also involved. So there is no one test, as you probably appreciate very well. There's no one test that says all these things, although there are profiles that can give an indication of things. What's the next one I've got? Propionibacterium acne is the one that contributes to acne, that's also associated with sarcoidosis and possibly psoriasis, although the enteroviruses are associated with a range of autoimmune conditions. And then what have we got next? We've got, Streptococcus pyogenes, strongly associated with psoriasis. What I've done here is although there's a longer list, and I have a longer list, and we can all probably gain access to that longer list of what I call bugs with potential, is that these are ones that are more definitively associated with a specific type of autoimmunity. And then you've got the generalization. So I wonder how many people with autoimmunity actually have an Epstein-Barr virus burden that does the immune system in a way that then allows the immune system to want to make antibodies to these things. So I think these are probably the most common. These are the ones I haven't put varicella on, I haven't got Coxsackie virus on, I haven't put HSV1, HSV2. So we can always go on further. But I think hopefully these are main ones. Now, of course, there are 87 autoimmune conditions, and maybe tomorrow it's going to be 90, maybe it's actually 95, and maybe there are 200 in total. There may be a lot of conditions that we think are macular degeneration is an association with oxidation of the cataract, for example, and we need antioxidants for it. Maybe that will turn out to be autoimmune in its nature, as opposed to purely oxidative stress. Or maybe oxidative stress is the bigger factor, and behind the scenes, there's an autoimmune aspect to it. So we've got things to find out. And that's where someone like Ari Bojtani and looking at antibodies, unless it's searched for, unless you turn over that stone and have a look, we don't know. So there are definitely unknowns. And what I found is that what I've endeavored to do myself, and I would say it's something that I was taught by Trevor Gale, who taught kinesiology to me, with the skill set that he taught me, which is basically in 2000, how on earth, imagine someone came along and they were tested positive. Let's just say, imagine you had all these things and you had an antibody. What the heck do I do? Is it important, or do I heal my leaky gut and avoid gluten and I'll get better? What do we do? Can't change my genes, and maybe I should take probiotics and remove toxins, and maybe that'll be more important than these bugs. And so my aim is always to have been, and I can't swear that I've got it right each time, but it seems to work quite well, is to identify exactly what each person needs to address, which is really, it's not the multi-million-dollar answer, but it is, to me, hugely relevant. I have many clients have this test. They've got organic acid testing, stool testing, antibody testing, toxin testing. And it's overwhelmed with each one. Imbalances in all of them. What do we do? What do we treat? And so my aim has really been from the year 2000, when he introduced this notion of, well, there's always a priority sequence of treatment. And this is something that functional medicine itself doesn't address, although you can't really go wrong by starting with the gut first. And so this notion of we'll start with the gut and then go from there, it makes sense. But sometimes it's not start with the gut. It's something else. And so I liken it to the following. If I may share a sort of analogy, which I think all analogies fail because they're always more simplistic than the complexity of the human body. So I liken it to like a derelict building that's in trouble. So imagine you and I, we go into the house. Let's say we're going to somebody else's house, not your house. We go to somebody else's house and actually smell of smoke. I've got smell of smoke. So there must be some fire somewhere, because there ain't no smoke without fire. And then we walk through the kitchen and we see there's a dripping. There's actually leaking pipe underneath the kitchen sink. So there's a leak. The windows of the house are broken. The curtains are torn. The carpets are ripped up. The floorboards are wonky. You get the idea. So we're talking about someone's body, but in terms of houses, also there's some electric issues, and there's the lights have gone out, etc. So I asked, what would you do first? Well, I wouldn't start putting up new curtains, and I wouldn't start painting the walls. Yeah. I wouldn't do that. I know it's so obvious, but what's difficult to know is how do you translate that to the evidence you've got for a client? And so I'd always put the fire out first, wouldn't you? Yeah. So we put the fire out first. So sometimes for people, even if you found these things, you want to stop the immune reactivity of these things and dampen the fire. Otherwise, nothing's going to get better. You put the fire out first. So I find that a very useful analogy. I think probably I find it, like all things that I know, I got it from someone else. I'm not sure I've had original thought really by myself. It's all learned, and I've had to let go and lose a lot of thoughts I thought were true. I found the analogy so useful because we can find the evidence of this dilapidated house where the front gate's swinging and it's broken. No one's mown the lawn for a while. The weeds are still there. But what on earth do you do with it? So don't deal with, I wouldn't put new curtains until you've done the windows. And I wouldn't do the windows and curtains until I've done a lot else in the house. So you might get a cosmetic benefit, you understand, from my analogy. Yeah. Oh, the house looks nicer now. Someone's painted the outside and got curtains up. But actually, on the inside, actually the fire's still smouldering, smoke's still there, and there's a leak, et cetera, et cetera. So we need electrics, we need... So I think that analogy, hopefully that's useful. I'll stop the share there. Just I found that analogy so useful, and it's one that maybe someone out in functional medicine shared that one with me, but I know they have their own matrix, which I'm well familiar with in terms of how to deal with things. But unless you know what to find, as you pointed out, unless you actually find and know what you're dealing with, so it's called targeted nutritional therapy on a functional medicine basis, how on earth can you possibly get success? So at the same time, maybe we all got skills. We've all got fire blankets. We can all put fire blankets on, which is antioxidants or anti-inflammatory agents. But then how do you know which, because each different fire might require a different type of either fire extinguisher or fire blanket. So how do you know the inflammation is in this environment or this component or part of the body? And that again is rather boggling. There's so many things. I mean, does everyone need turmeric? The answer is no. Does everyone need any one particular thing? No. Everyone needs something different. So it is extremely challenging. And sometimes, frankly, it is going to be a trial and error. Although the reason for meeting Trevor Gale and having him teach me about priorities was to minimize the error. So it's going to be a trial, hopefully with success, at least make some headway.
So when it comes to, if you want to test for some of these things, because we know that obviously testing gets expensive for clients. A lot of these tests are not cheap.
Hundreds of pounds, yes.
So how do you approach the testing aspect? Because based on sort of what we've said, you could sort of go along the approach of we need to kind of test for everything almost, So,
yeah, but then how do you make the decision to know what to treat if they're all imbalanced anyway?
How do you make a decision on sort of where to go with that sort of testing picture?
Yeah, it is a good question, because let's face it, maybe if I have 10 clients with MS, let's choose that subject, and we do the 3 tests with everyone. So we do a stool test, we do an antibody test, and we do a toxin test, let's say. So we find that the chlamydia pneumoniae is there, we find there's toxins there. Patrick Kingsley, who's passed away, but he was very much into mercury in MS. And he was involved in teaching me in 1992, 93. Mercury in MS. I mean, that was his bag, as everyone's got toxic metals. With toxic metals, of course, that actually allows viruses to be more likely to be present too. So who knows how many of the people. So he helped people adjust their mercury and had success with clients with MS by addressing mercury. That was his bag. So how do you know which one to do? So this is where I came to in 2000. How on earth do you know what to do?
Yeah.
When you know stuff, and of course I know so much more now, but of course the more I know, the more you don't know. And so it's just a never-ending process. And I do my best to try and understand the scientific papers that I read in preparation for teaching and so on, is I want to get the gist of it. So for me, I'm always listening to, because I'm a clinician, first I'm reading the scientific papers with a view to how can I use this information in clinical practice? What's the value of it, as opposed to writing a thesis on something.
Yeah.
He trained me in kinesiology, muscle testing. Now, I did have a bioresonance device for about 7 years. It was a QXCI. We also got an Asara machine at home, and I found that was very useful for picking up things. So it's a vibrational method. And his machine was originally designed to test astronauts' health when they were in space, so you could use it from afar. So it was a quantum process, boggling at the time. And I found that gave me so much data. It wasn't able to pinpoint down. So I like the wisdom of the higher self of the body. So I would say that I use kinesiology testing. I'm not a qualified kinesiologist. I've just learned muscle testing, and it seems to be very effective. But I'm not pretending I'm a kinesiologist. So I say I use muscle testing, or I use a kinesiological method, but I'm not a kinesiologist. And I found that, and I used not to declare that in such conversations and interviews that I've had over the years, because it meant that if the audience isn't able to do or is not a kinesiologist, they can't do it. So it kind of excludes. But I would say that anyone can learn muscle testing. Anybody can learn dowsing. And dowsing and muscle testing, I would say it's absolutely worth pursuing that. As it was, I was fortunate enough to be able to find myself a teacher, and I paid him for 2 weeks straight. So I had 5 days and 5 days and 2 weeks. He taught me how to do muscle testing. And then I had on the phone to him a lot after that saying, it's not working. He said, Anthony, practice. So it does say practice and confidence. And that has completely changed things. So I don't want to wish to exclude you or anybody else who doesn't do muscle testing, but there is a way, because most of the time in the early days, I'm not sure what percentage it is, as the muscle testing gets it right way more often than my 1% of my conscious brain does. So we all operate from the 1% of our conscious brain, 99% of the brain's unconscious. So I just recognize that the muscle testing basically finds the answer. And to give the answer now, with experience, I can now say that, yes, when we're talking about the bugs, is that I have found the bugs to be priorities to come to the quick. And so therefore, I would say that do the test for the bugs, and it may be a very, very good thing to strengthen the immune system to help deal with the bugs. So hence we're talking about that conversation, and you're aware of the EBV for you. And so it makes sense. So talking to you, it makes sense to you. It doesn't jar. You say, well, that makes sense. So that's why I've given presentations on autoimmunity and infections since 2016. I think was the first time I gave a webinar on the subject, and I have many times since. So I think the bugs are super present, but in time, maybe the toxin burden will be more of a negative factor. And in time, maybe certain types of stress, you pick up stress. So I think weighing up, putting everything on the scales, as it were, saying, well, is it stress we need to deal with? Is it gut microbiome? And it's looking at these things. But I have to say, if someone's got gut symptoms, they've got a gut imbalance. So maybe we know that, but you can't tell from symptoms if someone's got a particular type of bug.
Yeah,
it's just they got a condition. Whereas, let's say they got fatigue and leaky gut might be obvious. Food sensitive is, well, look, let's avoid the usual suspects. I mean, 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the usual suspects, and you're eating them all the time. So maybe we exclude those. So it's a really, so we don't have to have tests for everything, because the signs and symptoms tell us what's going on. Okay, let's change the diet. I mean, the vast majority of people who change their diet have an improvement anyway. Let's improve the gut microbiome. We could do that without testing. We don't have to necessarily know specifically. So I think in terms of testing, I've tended to err more towards doing the antibody tests through blood tests than other tests for autoimmunity, because it's like, what happens if it was CP and not EBV for you?
Yeah.
The antiviral approach doesn't necessarily inhibit the intracellular CP. Although I have found the ADP oregano, which is not particularly useful as a broad spectrum antiviral. It is brilliant as an antibacterial, particularly the ones that are hard to reach. So because of the emulsified nature of the ADP oregano, where the molecule size is not that size, it's that size gets everywhere. So it's the sustained release emulsified form which allows it to have the potency of oregano. I mean, if anyone had oregano on their mouth, I mean, it's super pungent. It's like clove.
Yeah.
It's just like, whoa, and it won't get anywhere else. It'll hit you here. Brilliant for that, but it won't actually work systemically against much. So that's where the emulsified form works best. So on the one hand, I've sort of said to you, if you're already involved in dowsing or kinesiology, then that's like, oh, well, I can't do that. That wasn't very useful for me. But based on experience, I will still say that looking at the antibody testing for bugs, which is part of the conversation today, is probably a very valuable one.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's probably one of the most valuable, I think, within sort of autoimmunity, isn't it?
Yeah, so you've come to that conclusion without necessarily muscle testing everyone you've seen, and then you've had success. Congratulations to you on that. And again, changing your life is a big deal. So congratulations to you on that.
Yeah, you've touched on a couple of things. You've mentioned, the ADP oregano, and you've mentioned a couple of things. But if we do this testing, somebody's got these antibodies, it comes back, we're looking at that it is this viral or bacterial, whichever it might be. What are the sort of, and I know we're not talking protocols here, but what are the sort of diet, lifestyle, nutraceutical, what are those things that you would be then considering or looking at in that person?
So we start with diet. I would say, people ask me, do you write a diet menu? Now, having done that in the past, it can take me a week to type it up. It's extremely onerous. It's like, oh yeah, I'll do that for you. It's like, oh my goodness me. So I start, which I think is very appropriate. I think it's practical as well, with wherever someone's at. So wherever someone's at, I start with their existing diet and go on that, as opposed to, by the way, here's a diet from America, which includes the words eggplant, which you can't understand anyway. So it's so I start with wherever someone's at, and I would identify the usual suspects. So I would estimate that the vast majority, I'm not saying everyone, because when there's a law, the law's to be broken. Virtually everyone needs to be gluten-free, and virtually everyone needs to be casein-free. So it's standard nutritional recommendations. And I've seen spoofs from various comedians about what nutritionists do. And it's very funny, because it is absolutely true. It's what we all say. But of course, there's a truth to it. So like with cliches are true. And then there's, what's number 3 on the list? Eggs. Eggs are 3 on the list. Food sensitivity panels, and then you've got yeast, and then you've got almonds, and you've got kidney beans. They come up a lot. Peas come up a lot as well. So I would look for the usual suspects. So the usual suspects and say, well, how much of your diet is coming from those foods? And potentially avoiding grains too, because there can be cross-reactivity. So I'd include oats, even if they're gluten-free. So be gluten-free, oat-free, and have less grain. So it's more of the paleo style, hence the paleo autoimmunity movement that's now existing. And so I would clean up their diet. And some people would like to engage, well, I wonder what difference that will make to me. So we say, well, let's do that for a month. But to be honest, I want to get them to the end result quicker. So I would change the diet and recommend supplements at the same time rather than wait to see what impact each one had effectively. And they might need, look, you've got such bad gut issues. We've got to help your gut symptoms out. So at least we have some sort of breakthrough. So does that require some sort of gut healing remedy? There's that like IPS capsules, Permavite, the two I've used, or GI Mend, which are products from NutriLink. And then I would maybe consider a probiotic, which has an anti-inflammatory effect, maybe supports secretory IgA with Saccharomyces boulardii, which Michael Ash put on the map originally.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the most studied probiotic strain of anything in the world, over and above Lactobacillus GG, which has the most studies of any kind of any bacterial strain. So S. boulardii is a common frequent flyer. So gut lining support, avoid the gut. So definitely reduce the major source of inflammation in the body, which is generally from the gut. So you do common sense application, but how many clients have you and I met who have an autoimmune condition where they have no particular gut issues at all?
Yeah.
But they might still have a quiescent gut imbalance. And that may in the future require a stool test to give some discernment because the symptoms don't tell you. But generally speaking, I would look to correct their gut symptoms.
And sometimes those gut symptoms can come out as brain symptoms as well.
Gut brain.
Yeah, because of that connection. And a lot of people that I've spoken to don't sort of realize that. They'll sort of say, I'll be starting to look at the gut and they're like, I don't have gut symptoms. And I'm like, but do you have brain fog? Like if you've got these things, let's take a look at the gut and just see what's going on. Because
absolutely, yes, it seems to be the next thing in line with the gut is the furthest thing from it. Well, it's not necessarily your foot, but it's your brain. For sure. The gut-brain connection, obviously, fascinating. And actually, in terms of connection, also the nervous system irritation from the gut can also affect the brain, not just the chemicals or immune complexes. And I remember someone shared with me once upon a time that when conception occurs, there's this process of cell division called mitosis, which I've heard the term mitosis, cell division. One part of the cell forms the spinal cord and brain. What does the other one form? It's the enteric nervous system. So in fact, they came from the same original place. And I understand that 80% of the communication is from the gut to the brain and 20% is from the brain to the gut. I don't know. I can't necessarily validate that. That is correct. You can no doubt confirm that. So it's certainly looking to calm that. And then many individuals actually have an issue with serotonin with regard to that communication issue. So bloating. One day I'll actually present on serotonin. There's so much to learn about serotonin, is that you need enough for the brain, but also plays vital roles in the gut motility and bloating. And if I had a cure for bloating, I would probably be a millionaire, as they say, with a fan base of millions, because if you could resolve bloating. But serotonin is one part of the issue with bloating as well. And serotonin can be very important for the brain. So yes, so gut brain. And then in terms of directly addressing the bugs, if I get to that immediately. So how do we do with the bugs? I find that a lot of bacteria, most of the bacteria, I would consider the ADP oregano, which is probably why when I phoned up Biotics in the 1990s, I think it was 1998, NutriLink had started as a partnership, 1997. It was a partnership, and then we created a limited company in 1998, or 1999, so it's 25 years old now. And I phoned Biotics up and I said, can you tell me about your top 10 products, for example, because we're interested in stocking you if that would be possible. And that didn't happen for some years until after that. And the medical director of Biotics, he said in his very strong Texan accent, he said, ADP. ADP, I don't know what that was. ADP oregano, I had the catalog. Okay, look that up. ADP. Then he read out 9 other products. So the first product that he said was ADP. And it is actually, just for your interest, it is curious, but it does reflect the efficacy, I think, not just the popularity. It's the number 1 selling product for NutriLink, I think, forever. It is such an effective antimicrobial. It reaches the parts other beers can't reach, and it's completely unique. No other company makes a fully emulsified, sustainable release oregano. In fact, the emulsification process they have fully emulsifies their product, and no other company in the world fully emulsifies any product. Yeah,
it's one I use in clinic, and I know it's one that a lot of my colleagues that I've come through studying with all use in clinic.
Yeah,
and
so you're bumping up the sales. So, but effectively, it's effective. It's effective, and it works. And sometimes you need to use a higher amount than you think would be. Well, I've got 5 at each meal. It's quite a lot, but it can be. You need the right concentration. So you need what's called the minimum inhibitory concentration, MIC, in order to achieve the effect within the body. So I use ADP for the bacterial things, don't really use it for viruses. And for viruses, I have found, and you may not have heard me talk about this, I've talked about this in a variety of different environments, humic acid, the black substance, is basically ancient sort of compost that may be 50 to 100,000 years old, compost gotten from the crusts of the earth. And I visited the doctor who creates it, the PhD chemist, flew to Newport Beach, and I went to interview him, and he offered me his company for $10 million, which was very generous of him at the time, thinking that I was Mr. Moneybags or something. But so he supplied the humic acid to allergy research groups. So that's how I got the introduction. So he took me out to lunch. He's got his home chemistry kit, and he discovered that the humic acid that he gets, and he's got humic acid from coal mines all over the world and all different continents. And he finds that in Southern California, not far from where he was, effectively in Newport Beach, was the most effective humic acid against viruses. So humic acid is like saying pizza. It's like, well, what's your topping?
Yeah.
It's like it's a base. But the nanoparticulate size of this particular humic acid from Southern California that allergy research use, and other companies do too, and he supplies 99% of the North American humic acid.
Wow.
To the market. That was 10 years ago, more than that. So I flew to Newport Beach, had a meeting with him, hired a car, went to meet him. He's very gracious. He bought me lunch at a nice place, and I looked around his chemistry lab, and he showed me, and he tests a whole variety of supplements. He showed me all the supplements that humic acid's in the American market. Richard Laub, L-A-U-B, there you go, PhD. He was the head of chemistry at Ohio State and then San Diego universities before he went out on his own with humic acid, and discovered that 99% of the humic acid, and he's the supplier of 99% of the North American humic acid, is a drill bit protector for mining companies. So it seems that when they drill bits, the drill bits, if they wear down, then they have to replace them. That's time consuming and costly.
Yeah.
If you put humic acid sort of through a pipe around the drill bit as it's drilling, it greatly preserves its life.
Gosh.
Who knew such a thing? I mean, talk about random. You didn't know this was coming today. And I'm reminded of it now as I speak. But there's it's a very small nanoparticulate matter that prevents the degradation of the diamond drill bits, which means it saves companies tens of thousands of dollars by protecting the drill bits when they're digging for things. So humic acid I've used, and it basically acts like this. So here we got a virus, and we got cells here. The virus living in this cell is going to die in a certain period of time, as all cells do. And then it sends out a virion, like an arm, to go next door and penetrate the next door cell, and then cell perpetuate and take over the machinations of the cell and carry on living, as all these bugs want to carry on living. The humic acid acts like Velcro, so that this virion, this arm, comes out and grabs onto the virion and stops it from migrating to the next door cell.
Gosh, it's amazing how these things are found, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's like a Velcro. It's the same way that it protects the drill bit, it protects the cell, because it actually blocks something, but it blocks the drill bit from getting damaged. It blocks the virus from migrating. So humic acid, I happen, not coincident, I've actually taken the humic monolaurine complex, because monolauric acid from coconut and olive leaf extract in the humic monolaurine complex is a trio of things. Although I've used humic acid more in my life, I've taken humic monolaurine complex 2 and 2 for the last 4 years every single day.
Really?
And have I been ill? No. I had COVID, whatever that is. I didn't do a test for it, but I definitely had COVID. And it was a very odd experience in the sense I was just completely wiped. I couldn't walk up the stairs. It was, boy, at least that allows me to relate to other people who've had the misfortune of being very unwell with it. But I knew I'd get over it. So I was okay. I just thought, this is an interesting experience for about a day and a half. Just literally I couldn't move up the stairs, and everything hurt. And it's kind of,
but a day and a half with COVID is pretty good.
Day and a half, and and it's and I thought, if I was 70 years old or 80 years old and frail, I'm not surprised I'd have been out for weeks and weeks and not recovered. And then there's long COVID as well, which I presented on. But humic monolaurine complex and or humic acid, and I found that often the rotation of them, for whatever reason, seems to work quite well as opposed to stay on one. Now I use kinesiology testing, and so I've tested up more recently the HMC, humic monolaurine complex. If I use humic acid, strangely enough, I also find that olive leaf extract, which allergy research actually has stopped producing for now, but I found olive leaf extract with humic acid to be very effective, essentially, in terms of providing an external support to inhibit viruses from within, but also we want to support the innate immune system within. So what would I do for that? Well, there are a number of things that help support Th1. The Th1, which is the intracellular home defense, so Dad's army type of, as opposed to the antibodies with snipers that will only shoot certain things. And I found that there are limited numbers of things that help the Th1, and you won't be surprised, and you may well know them anyway. I believe that zinc has a role in helping that, not surprisingly. And then you've got licorice.
Yeah.
And of course, you wouldn't take that in the evening time. You wouldn't take it necessarily if you've got high blood pressure. If you took it and someone has a blood pressure issue, you'd want to make sure you monitor their blood pressure in case you negatively affected them with blood pressure issues, because it also increases aldosterone and can deplete potassium, and that can raise blood pressure. But it also raises cortisol too. So I wouldn't recommend it to someone with high cortisol, but I'd recommend it to someone, of course, most people I meet who are tired might actually have a low cortisol, although I have to say that test I've done 3,500 times, because sometimes the symptoms of high and low cortisol can be the same, as you probably realize. And you think, oh, clearly you've got low cortisol because you're knackered and you're better off lying down than sitting up. And you have real difficulty with it. And you discover they got high cortisol instead of low cortisol. So I found that test is very useful.
It's one I use a lot. I think it's difficult to tell. And I think
it is, isn't it?
What you need to do does vary based on, it is going to make a difference. I think that's how I explain it to people is depending on whether you are high or low, it is going to make a difference. So it's good to know. And to be fair, that one's not a particularly expensive, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a particularly expensive test compared to the others.
So licorice can be very useful. N-acetylcysteine, NAC can also help too, and that has an direct antiviral effect, which many practitioners don't know. It does have an direct antiviral, quite apart from its other wonders. So as Rob Verkert from the Alliance for Natural Health has coined the term, at least I heard it from him first, nearly all conditions, NAC. So it's just, yes, NAC. But what's interesting is that when people don't muscle test up for NAC, and that's a more complicated conversation in a way, but NAC, licorice, zinc, I think those three, perhaps in particular, will be things I would consider for. So not many sort of support. And then there are other herbal things too, potentially one could consider for innate immune support. Now, in order for other innate immune support, Saccharomyces boulardii and probiotics to help the innate immune system, which helps to bring balance to the Th1, Th2 aspect of health. So there are very few things I know of that specifically will raise Th1. Selenium may be beneficial because that's also an antiviral itself. And selenium and NAC, of course, both precursors to glutathione, which may actually help the overall inflammation control. And then I would be definitely looking at sort of coming back to the gut and helping mucosal immunity, innate immunity, Saccharomyces boulardii and/or probiotics. Again, there's a whole world of probiotics, and it's fascinating because I've been muscle testing those for 23 years, now going on 24 years, to see which ones are most effective. So it's a question of balancing innate immune support and identifying, do they need Th1 upregulation, or do you need something to temper the antibody response? So to temper the antibody response, to go to the next bit, quercetin can be useful to inhibit interleukins and histamine, which is more of a factor in long COVID. And also luteolin. Now, the Allerade L92 product from Allergy Research was created by Todd Bourne, naturopath who used to work with Allergy Research. And he basically called it quercetin on steroids as a joke. I don't think it really is. But luteolin and this probiotic of L-lactobacillus L92, which has been shown to reduce allergy. For some individuals who've got an inflammatory response, how do you know the symptoms are due to the virus or the immune response to it? And it's difficult to know. So the Allerade L92 is probably the single most effective anti-allergic symptom supplement I've used, which I used to use quercetin, and now sometimes I use one and the other to find out. So I don't know which one's going to be most effective. If you haven't muscle tested, if I muscle test, sometimes it rotates anyway. Allerade L92, reducing the sort of allergic activity. So it helps to reduce the antibody production, which can be very useful. So that can be like akin to putting a fire out, if you will. Yep. And then that allows the immune system to work better. And that actually ends up helping Th1 support. So the beauty is that it's unlikely that anybody will do harm with nutritional therapy. I just find a lot of people could waste their money on things they don't need. And that's why I think the muscle testing is so useful. I also have a resistance to lots and lots and lots of supplements, even though I might recommend lots and lots of supplements. But I liken it to, I don't know if you've ever done when you were healthier or when now, you tie a thick rubber band around your waist that's attached to the gym wall and you run away from the wall. And the further away from the wall you get, the greater the resistance is to bring you back. And often you need a mat because then you spring back on your bottom. And I'm like that with supplements, is that the more I recommend, the less I want there to be so many. At the same time, some clients categorically need a lot of support.
Yeah. With the diet side of things, I know you sort of mentioned there quite a lot of things that we take out of the diet, which, we have to do. But is this something I need to do for life? And I know there's probably an element of, gluten and things like that. We maybe are a slightly different picture, but
gluten, yes.
Taking things out, is it something that you keep people on very restrictive?
Yeah, I'm so sorry I didn't create balance there, because otherwise it sounds like the typical nutritionist saying exclude. Now I'm left with, no, look, I'm intermittent fasting a lot. So this is where I guess I introduce maybe a hero of yours, Terry Walls, who I've had the pleasure of meeting a few times and had nice conversations with her, and I've challenged her. I'll tell you about the conversation in a minute. And I've also, danced with her and her partner at the IFM dance events as well. So because she can dance now, she's not out of a wheelchair, as you know. So her legacy for humanity's health is extraordinary. So all hail her, no doubt about it. And she recommends cups because it's American-sized cups of vegetables. So I'd recommend more vegetables. Generally, I have to say it's cooked vegetables, not raw, because I find a lot of people can't tolerate, particularly in wintertime. So it's basically lots and lots of veggies, and of course the cruciferous vegetables, the brassicas, but cooked veggies. And a lot of people can't tolerate too much of them if they've got gut issues either, because they get more wind. So cooked vegetables, more of those, I think, and also more starchy carbohydrates instead of the grains. So, and also a greater variety of proteins. So I would actually identify what are you an omnivore? Are you vegetarian, chickatarian? What kind of vegetarian are you if you are? And I generally find it much more useful if someone's an omnivore and they eat a variety of proteins because, organically reared, pasture-fed proteins, hugely important. And hence the extension of that will be ultimately the carnivore diet, which there are many stories. But again, it's a question of what percentage of the audience are they? And if you've got a great story, it doesn't mean to say that someone I had a Mediterranean diet and I did really well. And that's not necessarily so spoken about in terms of autoimmunity is. But I had a carnivore diet, I had no veggies, nothing. I just had meat and fish, and that was all I had, and I got better. And really reflecting, a certain percentage, I think, of the autoimmune audience that could benefit from such a thing. So I certainly recommend the proteins, and particularly protein at breakfast and really stabilizing blood sugar. And then the good fats. And you may be aware of Ray Swank's work. I was familiar with his work from 1990. And so, very low fat diet. And for certain individuals, a very low fat diet, it could be, and it has been shown, Ray Swank was a very good doctor. And he did find that a very low fat diet, even though it may be frowned on nowadays. So, we need the good fats, the avocado, the butter, and the coconut oil, etc. But certainly with MS, Ray Swank, concentrated on that with low fat. So if you're going to have low grains and low carbs and low fat, that's going to be more carnivore anyway. So each individual will vary, and I think body type can also give a reflection of that too. So whether it's biotyping, which Alex Freshy teaches, or whether it's the mesomorph, ectomorph, endomorph type things, a way of viewing the body. I think you can get a sense of certain body types will do better on certain types. And that's probably a day for another conversation, which I'm not so familiar with to be able to, I wouldn't be the one to talk about with that, but it'd be, again, fascinating to see. And then there's Ayurvedic medicine, so it'd be Vata Pitta Kapha, which you do questionnaires and give you a sense of what you're dominant in, can be useful too. There are actually 1,200 different modalities of assessing where someone's at and their health, by the way. 1,200. Obviously, the ancient Ayurvedic ones and so on are very old. And the Chinese approach, the sort of the 5 elements is an acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine. They're very old, but there are 1,200 different modalities from eat right for your type, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So I would that's why I find muscle testing so useful, because it cuts through all of that and identifies what the person in front of me needs, as opposed to me trying to figure out which particular modality or approach is going to be best for them. But generally speaking, you're right. Grains, and there are 16 negatives for wheat minimum, including the pesticides and glyphosate.
Yeah, and that's a whole other conversation a bit around all of that sort of side of things, and and organic foods and all of that, and that is so different to what are a bit like your grandfather with the stress foods that we eat today compared to the foods that he would have eaten growing up, and the sort of pesticides and all of this. I mean, that's a whole other picture as well, isn't it?
Yes. Can you imagine in 1920 when he was 15 and he had a meat and 2 veg, let's say, meat and 2 veg and potatoes, let's say, meat and 2 veg and potatoes, and you assess the nutritional status and the toxins in that meal compared to an identical photographic image of me eating it when I was 15 in 1980, which is when I first got into nutrition consciously, completely different nourishment level.
Yeah. Completely.
Yeah, for sure. I think people use the word clean. I've actually never used the word clean with a client, and I probably won't ever do that. But eating clean, do you wash your food before you eat it?
Yeah, I try and avoid it as well.
Yeah, it's for me, it's a sort of biohacker's term, and it's sort of like, well, what do you mean by clean? It's really looking to avoid the things that can cause inflammation and immune reactivity, and also not high on levels of toxins and pesticides. But so I think the world's a big place, internet's a big place, and you've got celebrities doing various things. But essentially, whole fresh food, no ultra-processed food, and no refined sugar. Yeah, I recommend liver as well, organic liver if you can get it. Super, super, super good. And it's actually really a source of copper over and above iron. I'm not sure if you're aware of the metabolism of copper and iron. I'm giving a webinar on that in April. if you haven't heard the story on that one, but because that has a big influence to do with oxidative stress and inflammation.
Yeah.
If you've got a poor management of iron, you've got more inflammation present. And a lot of people think, well, if you eat red meat, you got lots of iron, so maybe I don't want too much iron in my body, for good reason. Well, actually, liver, for example, has more copper relatively, and copper regulates the iron in liver. And also vitamin A is a very important thing that's often lacking in the diet nowadays.
Yeah, that's another one. Yeah.
Yes, there's so much to say, so much to talk about. But essentially, yes, it's really on the face of it. You had a photograph of someone's diet, or you saw a couple of days' food on a trestle table. Basically, it's really wholesome, nourishing, completely recognizable food.
Yeah.
And there may not be no gluten in sight, maybe no grains in sight, but it's completely nourishing. And nuts and seeds may play a part in that as well. So it's just an healthy oil. So really, it's a really healthy spread. So I guess you could say it's more Mediterranean style. But what's often left out of the Mediterranean story is that the generally speaking, the people who are eating the meal have been physically active in the morning and the afternoon, all day long. And they also take maybe 2 hours in a sociable environment in the sunshine eating the meal. So there's quite a lot going on, not just the food alone with the Mediterranean approach.
And it's a bit that sort of blue zone thing, isn't it? Of the sort of having community, having purpose, all of these sort of things that play into it as well. It's not just diet.
Yes, and maybe the Hara Hachibu, which Dan Buettner talks about as well. I read that book years ago. I actually saw the Netflix series as well, because he's quite a lot older than when I remembered him in the book. And he doesn't move quite as nimbly as I thought he might do nowadays. But the Hara Hachibu, which means you're basically eating 80% of what you need and pushing away and leaving the table when you're not full.
Yeah.
Because the greatest Mark Houston, the professor of hypertension at Tennessee, you might know of him, a brilliant biochemist, he says that every single individual has a leaky gut to some degree after eating every meal. And most inflammation in your body is derived from the food you've eaten, i.e. a meal. And therefore, large meals are bad for anyone. So if you had the Mediterranean diet and you ate too much, you'd still cause inflammation.
Yeah.
So there is that. So it's about balance with lots of things.
Yeah, and that's definitely something I experienced, particularly when I was sort of really going through it, was I couldn't eat big meals at all. I could eat like 5 small meals a day, like almost 5 snacks, almost of much smaller meals, but I could not eat a big meal. If I ate a big meal, my symptoms flared up. And
that highlights it perfectly, doesn't it? Yeah,
and that was a real problem. When I say it was a real problem, it was really hard when you were going out for like dinner, or trying to do things like try and be
practically speaking,
practicalities and things. I would go out for dinners and order a starter, but I'd still be eating. I just had to do like sort of smaller meals through the day and eat more often. And that really flared my symptoms up. So that was a big one for me, was that I couldn't tolerate the big, heavy sort of big meal. I mean, I can now, but I've done a lot of work on my health since then. But going back, that was one that was a real problem for me. And I think can be a real problem for a lot of people. It's this picture of putting everything together. There's so much that we could talk about.
So, I mean, I think, so host is everything, the host terrain, and that's still hugely relevant. And I think that's what's gone down for one reason or another. To summarize your original question, which is why do you think autoimmune conditions are on the increase? Because host terrain immunity is diminished.
Yeah.
And so it's got to do with malnourishment, excess stress, excess toxins, rush, so that we switched off immunity. So it's not so much the bug's fault. It's not the bug suddenly becoming, bad. And it's just that our immune system becomes less capable of handling it. So it's all to the immune system, which wasn't really focused on at all. Well, in fact, it wasn't focused on at all deliberately in COVID. Well, how do you strengthen your own innate immune system? Yeah, I think it's a reflection of modern society. And but the good news is, and you're a living example of it, so that's congratulations to you, of just really taking all the steps possible. So, sleep hygiene, huge fan of that. Yeah, it's but it's effectively bugs. So the bugs have made the difference, where I've had clients who don't have MS anymore, who don't have RA anymore, and it's because they don't have sarcoidosis anymore, which is that was an interesting result. I had no idea what's going to happen there. Don't see many clients with that. And they needed vitamin D, even though they said don't take vitamin D, because we did a test and so it says don't take vitamin D if you've got sarcoidosis because they don't handle it properly. Well, he needed vitamin D. I'm trying to think other cases. Psoriasis, I've had clients who don't have that anymore. But again, I find that challenging with people who I don't make much progress. Everyone varies. There is a continuum, but I've had clients who don't have these conditions anymore because we addressed the bug.
Yeah.
So I rest my case in a balloon debate, if it was such a thing, to say that I do believe that bug present, the infectious agent, which you've chosen to talk to me about today, is a super relevant one.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree. Thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge today and joining us on the podcast. I know the listeners are going to find this episode really, really interesting, and it's been really, really fascinating to talk to you.
I hope so. I know it's a long one. If anyone listens to it in a stretch, then good for you. Nicole, thank you so much for having me on, and I hope that if it benefits one person, that's fantastic. If it benefits more, that's all the better. And I wish you well with yours. Congratulations on being at the forefront for your own health, and then be able to share that with others.
Thank you, and thank you for your time today as well.
Okay, very welcome.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Good Health Podcast. Do share the episode with anyone who you think it may benefit or who may enjoy it, and help me spread the word by rating the episode or leaving a review. If you want more, you can find other episodes in the series on your podcast app or sign up to my free newsletter. Not only will you get information on new episodes launching, but we cover lots of health topics with the Ask Nicole section where you can send in your questions, my favorite recipes, my favorite products, tips and tricks to help you on the road to good health, and much more. You can sign up free of charge at nicolegoodhealth.com/newsletter, also linked below. I hope you have a lovely week. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time.